Chapter 301. How far did you research? 5. After seeing Bedler off, I slumped into the corner of the booth. Louise approached me with concern, but I just shook my head, telling her it was no big deal. In reality, it was a big freaking deal. I no longer needed to wonder what a life with 3 divine punishments stacked up would be like. From now on, I'd just need to look in the mirror to find out. Still, I couldn't exactly tell Louise, "Hey, I've been divinely punished. It's a miracle I'm not dead." Even if lovers shouldn't keep secrets, this was beyond that level. Damn it. I quietly closed my eyes, feeling like tears might flow if I kept them open. Thinking about it, this world had gods that actually existed and could intervene in human affairs. Enon, having achieved religious victory, seemed to have quieted down after an intense game, but wasn't the North the only pagan area beyond Enon's influence? There was no guarantee that the god of this pagan area would be as quiet as Enon. I was foolish. Even the eternal blue sky was a divine being like Enon, yet I dismissed it as merely a nomadic cultural tradition. Human power cannot suppress an enraged god's doing. As a result, Bedler shook his head without hesitation. Apparently, even the most merciful god would be furious at the murder of an apostle, the destruction of a temple, and the desecration of their sacred objects. Honestly, I'd probably be livid too if I were in their shoes. While killing the apostle might be justified as self-defense, burning down the temple and defiling cherished possessions was another matter entirely. It's one of the few records about the eternal blue sky, but I heard that the temple was built on the burial site of the first person to worship the eternal blue sky. They say it has 8 pillars, while other temples have fewer than 8. To make matters worse, the temple I burned had 8 pillars. In terms of my previous world, it's like I burned down St. Peter's Basilica. From the eternal blue sky's perspective, I must be the worst bastard in existence. Even among pagans and enemy nations, it was an unwritten rule not to touch holy sites. Fortunately, there is hope. Yet, even in this insane situation, there was supposedly hope. For a moment, I thought Bedler might be telling a white lie to comfort me, but his expression was deadly serious. Honestly, it's a situation where death wouldn't be surprising, but seeing that you're still alive, brother, it seems that the eternal blue sky is avoiding directly harming a follower watched over by Enon. So, they're angry but still have some rationality left. Yes, I believe that with an apology and appropriate compensation, forgiveness might be possible. I had caused such a ruckus that the other side was furious, but not so much that they'd lost all reason to the point of gods confronting each other. So, I must apologize and pay compensation. If I do, then even a god might forgive me. It was a strangely capitalistic approach, but thankfully, it wasn't too difficult. It would have been more troublesome if I had to go to the holy site and perform a ceremony according to the nomadic traditions. It's embarrassing for me, who follows the Lord's teachings, to tell you to pray to another god, but shouldn't we save lives first? Seeing Bedler make such a statement as a true priest, I resolved to make sincere donations to the Dawn sect and pray 3 times a day to the eternal blue sky from now on. Shit, what kind of life was this, anyway? Apart from being pushed around by the crown prince and ministers, now I was even being pushed around by gods. Still, let's stay strong. While I couldn't do anything about the dead Kagan and the burned-down temple, maybe this god might overlook it if I diligently manage their sacred objects from now on. As for the rest, I'll just have to settle it directly with the god involved through prayer. I'm sorry, eternal blue sky. I'll pay as much compensation as needed. I'd give offerings too if the temple were still standing, but I burned it down myself. I'll rebuild the burned temple if the North stabilizes. Except for Bedler's surprising announcement, the club fair proceeded smoothly. Last year's club fair went well too, aside from the third honor incident, and this year's additional mage guests were quietly waiting for the cookie auction, so nothing could possibly go wrong. The guests from Ernesto Academy will arrive tomorrow morning. Ah, it's already that time, isn't it? And now, the final guests have arrived. The visit of Ernesto Academy symbolized the end of the long rivalry. Thanks to this, the principal's face was full of a gentle smile. They could have come earlier, but it was agreed that Ernesto Academy's visit would be scheduled for the middle of the club fair to avoid overcrowding on the first day. Honestly, it seemed more like an attempt to tame them rather than manage crowds, but what could they do? When the boss says jump, they should only ask how high. Besides, it wasn't like they were being mistreated as the underdog. They'll surely be delighted despite the long journey. Being able to receive teachings from the Mage Duchess is the greatest honor. I nodded with a smile in response to the principal's words. While it may be an attempt to tame them, it was an agreement where they only had to swallow a bit of pride while gaining plenty of practical benefits, so they shouldn't have any complaints. After all, wouldn't the Mage Duchess teach them herself as long as they came to the club fair? They'd probably walk all the way here if they had to. It would be such a shame to send children who've come from so far away empty-handed. Meeting them once will allow everyone to part on good terms. They might even cry with emotion if they knew that the Mage Duchess volunteered for this surprise lesson. That's fortunate. It will be an opportunity to show just how excellent the Imperial Academy is. Ho ho, you're absolutely right. I discreetly congratulated the principal on his victory, and his smile deepened. It was heartwarming to see the principal smile like this. His twilight years, which had been severely damaged by the mass enrollment of foreign VIPs, had now recovered. The principal would likely remember this year's victory in the traditional rivalry rather than last year's disaster if he retired now. Well, all's well that ends well. After smiling for quite a while, the principal cleared his throat softly and continued. By the way, executive manager, how many cookies have been made? Though it was an abrupt change of topic, it was an important one, so I straightened up. It was funny how cookies were treated as a crucial matter between the academy principal and the executive manager, but unfortunately they really were important. The fate of the academy might hinge on the quantity of cookies. After all, they were more like medicinal elixirs in cookie form. We've made about 520 of them. We're storing them ourselves, so there's no need to worry. At this, the principal looked puzzled. While 520 wasn't exactly a small number, cookies were something that could be produced in bulk in a single batch. It had been several days since the decision was made to put the Mage Duchess's cookies up for auction, yet there were only 520. It was reasonable to find that odd. But the premise of mass production was wrong here. The Mage Duchess only made them when she felt like it, and most of what she made ended up being force-fed to me. It's not like I can shrink my stomach. Thanks to this, I had been consuming cookies in massive quantities, practically making meals out of them. From my perspective of having to eat them reluctantly, it was surprising that we'd secured even 520. I wish the principal could understand my plight. Don't worry, it doesn't take long to make them, and if we find we're short, we can always speed up production, can't we? Of course, for the sake of my stomach and the Academy's peace, I don't plan to continue this mass consumption. Even for limited editions, there was a limit. How would we deal with the aftermath if the supply was too low compared to the potential buyers? We could sell the cookies to hundreds of people if we sold them one by one, but it wasn't right to give just one to those who had come from far away. You'd be called heartless for doing that. The auction wasn't about profit but about keeping the peace, so we needed an approach that wouldn't leave people grumbling afterward. The trick was finding that delicate balance, not flooding people with cookies, but not offering too few, either. It was a familiar task for a civil servant. How could I worry when the executive manager is in charge? The principal didn't seem particularly concerned and simply nodded at my response. Right, no matter how seriously we discussed it, they were just cookies. We weren't dealing with some rare medicinal herbs, just cookies. They could be easily made with the Mage Duchess's touch, so there was no need to worry. Compared to last year, there was a noticeable increase in guests and a corresponding surge in sales. However, since production hadn't changed much from last year, all club members were working together diligently, except for 2 people. I'm sorry. As a teacher, I should be helping my students. One was teacher, who had become an honorary club member. Her pastry skills were certainly up to par, but due to various circumstances, we couldn't actually sell the pastries she made. It's all right. Just helping move the ingredients is a big help. It didn't matter. Thanks to teacher's magic, we were saving time on transporting materials. She couldn't directly assist in production, but her help with time management was invaluable. I'm sorry, a newbie like me is just holding everyone back. And the other was Sarah, our only new club member this year. She was still inexperienced with pastry making as she wasn't used to physical work. But I could see how hard she was trying, so I had no intention of scolding her. Moreover, unlike teacher, who absolutely couldn't be involved in the production process, Sarah could help with some odd jobs. She was fulfilling her role in her own way. It's natural for newcomers to be inexperienced. I was the same at first, so don't feel discouraged. So, I comforted the dejected Sarah. I didn't want to see any members sad at an event that was meant to be enjoyable. With that in mind, I patted her shoulder, and Sarah's slightly teary eyes began to regain their composure. I'll have 2 slices of cheesecake today, please. Before suddenly turning sharp, Her sudden change in attitude from a gentle lamb to a fighting cock made me instinctively step back. And as I naturally turned towards the voice, I saw someone I expected. A woman was smiling at Eric, who was at the sales counter. It was Eric's close sister figure, and obviously someone who had feelings for him. Countess Horfeld, our regular customer, was here again today. But strangely, I wasn't particularly happy to see her. If she had come when Sarah wasn't around, I might have welcomed her warmly. 2 slices. Usually, you order just one. One of them is for you to eat. You need to fill your stomach when you're working hard. You're the best as always, Nuna. Hearing their friendly conversation amidst this situation made me break out in a cold sweat. That idiot. I felt a slight resentment towards Eric as he smiled while packaging the cake. I mean, she was a dear friend from Eric's perspective, so being affectionate was unavoidable, but couldn't he at least refrain from saying she was the best when Sarah was clearly listening? Grit. I thought I heard the sound of teeth grinding next to me, but I pretended not to hear it. I don't know anything. Really, I don't. Chapter 302. How far did you research? 6. The name of the Haydn County wasn't one to be taken lightly. Receiving the title of Imperial Count from Emperor Amanka II, the second emperor, they had lived as the shield of the emperor and the imperial family for about 300 years. They lived in the shadow of the Livnomans for the sake of the mandate of heaven, attributing all glory to their sole master, the Livnomans. This was the pride and honor of the Haydn County. From the moment I was born as the firstborn of the Haydn County, 300 years of pride and honor were placed on my shoulders. Little did I know I would be both the first and the last. I'm placing a heavy burden on you. My father would sometimes say that while stroking my head. While the name of an imperial count must be shouldered by the firstborn, siblings could help the head of the family. However, I am alone. I had no older brothers or sisters to trust and follow, and no younger siblings to cheer me on. Still, I didn't show it. If I appeared weak, my father would be sadder, and our vassals would waver. Those who underestimate the county of Haydn would also start plotting. That was why I always had to appear dignified and cool-headed. It was my duty as one who bore the Haydn name and lived a peaceful life. So at first, I disliked Eric, just a tiny bit. These are the children of the Crossius family. The older brother is 2 years older than you, and the younger one is 2 years younger. What a coincidence. At a social gathering for imperial families, it wasn't strange for the heirs who would lead these families to meet. And since the patriarch of the Crossius family had been close to my father since childhood, we were introduced to the Crossius family first. It was natural for the parents' relationship to extend to their children. I exchanged greetings normally with Carl. He seemed to be attending out of obligation and I understood the burden on his shoulders, so I didn't mind. Why bother someone who was just in the same situation? Hello, Nuna. But Eric was different. Unlike Carl, he was cheerful and full of energy, and also much less formal. I was quite surprised when he suddenly called me, Nuna. My surprise was followed by annoyance. Firstborns like me and Carl had to bear heavy burdens, while this clueless younger brother was just being a nuisance. He could smile like that because he enjoyed rights without obligations and lived comfortably. Of course, that was nonsense. I was too young when I thought that, and as I grew a bit older, I became ashamed of myself. There was no way a noble had no obligations. Even if there weren't, that was no reason to dislike Eric. Do you practice swordsmanship too, Nuna? Hung and I do. Wow, you ride horses so well. Will I be able to ride like you someday? This is a gift. It's cheesecake. Our chef makes these really well. But back then, I didn't know shame. So, I kept Eric at a distance. Strangely, no matter how much I pushed him away, he kept coming back. While Carl, the actual heir, never thought of leaving Tailgilhen County, Eric would come all the way to Horfeld to play and act friendly. Looking back now, I'm so grateful for that. What are you doing, Nuna? Breathing. I'm truly thankful. Despite my blatant displays of annoyance, he didn't come to hate me. Anyway, Eric persistently came to play, and I mercilessly pushed him away. This odd relationship changed due to a trivial incident. It was the story of a child who wasn't particularly talented in martial arts trying to make up for it with effort, but ultimately reaching their limit and falling into despair. The story of a child crying in fear of not being able to live up to their father, who had made a name for himself with the sword. Wasn't it such a trivial and common story? This story, which could have ended so ordinarily, took a different turn when Eric visited as usual. Nanny says that important people don't need to be good at everything. Just showing that you're not giving up and improving is enough for others to respect and follow you. When I look at Hung and you, I think you're amazing. I could never do that. Honestly, it wasn't particularly helpful advice. It sounded like he was telling me to accept my limits and to conform to my talents. But why? Somehow, hearing those words made me feel at ease. It felt like the endless road had finally come to an end, like shade had appeared on a path that had only known scorching sunlight. If I'm lacking, my vassals will worry. So for the first time, I voiced the anxiety I had been keeping inside. It wasn't something I should say to someone younger than me, but I wanted to. Then you can help each other among nobles without your vassals knowing. I'll tell Hung to help you. I couldn't help but laugh at those words. If anything, my vassals were under my command, but nobles were my equals, so I shouldn't show weakness to them even more. Still, I didn't mention that. I just smiled at Eric for the first time and spoke. Could you help me instead of Carl? Sure, you're my friend, Nuna. I'll help you by your side for life. His promise made my heart flutter. Of course, I knew that it was just a child's casual remark. I had no intention of cowardly using those words to force Eric into marriage. What mattered was that his words had freed me from a life of self-imposed constraints and that I had fallen for this younger brother of mine. It was a precious memory I'd keep to myself. Holding that memory close, I worked hard to become a strong, confident sister Eric wouldn't need to protect. Hello, Countess. You've come again today. I prided myself on becoming such a sister, but why was there something bothersome next to Eric? It's Eric's booth, so I should help boost sales. We're not strangers, after all. I smiled slightly at the uninvited guest who had suddenly approached, and the little blonde girl's eyes sharpened. How rude. Did she think a chick like her frowning at me would change anything? A baron's daughter. I tried to ignore the chick in front of me, but in fact, her position as the young lady of a barony wasn't a weakness for her, but rather a poison that threatened me. If the chick bowed down to me, I might even consider accepting her as Eric's wife as a gesture of goodwill from the victor. But if I lose, then it was over. If Eric married the daughter of a baron, I'd have to let him go completely. So, I couldn't back down even more. Unlike that child who had a future even if she lost, one loss for me would be the end. I can't lose. His nanny's daughter, a childhood friend. I'm Eric's childhood friend, too. My father was also close to Eric's father. The conditions were the same. No, I had an overwhelming advantage. Compared to a girl who just sickly laid in bed, I had built connections in various fields and inherited the title of an imperial count. I lacked nothing. Eric just needed to come to me. Then, I could provide him with a life that lacked nothing. What can you offer? A frail young lady and the daughter of the Tramara barony, who was serving the Crossius family. Given that she was in a position to receive Eric's care, what could she possibly do for him? Of course, I wasn't saying that she should leave because her family's status was lacking or because she had nothing to offer. Love wasn't a strict transaction, but a symbiotic relationship where just being together brought happiness. You two seem to get along so well. Anyone would think you're siblings. I don't know about that. Eric and I don't look alike at all. If anything, you two look more like siblings. It was just that it would be wise of her to gracefully yield if a better match appeared. They're fighting again. Maybe I should come back later. I felt the urge to moonwalk away as soon as I returned from meeting Margetta. Sarah and Countess Horfeld were staring at each other with smiling faces but unfriendly eyes, while Eric was casually munching on cake between them. While other club members were holding their breath, he was even enjoying dessert. Was this guy's stomach made of steel, or was it his head? Judging by his recent record, it seemed like the latter. Oh, Opa, you're here. Just as my urge to moonwalk threatened to take over, Louise, who had been huddling in the corner in fear, came rushing over as if she'd found an oasis in the desert. I nodded quietly, realizing that my escape plan was doomed. I'll have to intervene. Seeing Louise's anxiety-filled face, I had no choice. The catfight, or whatever you'd call this no-holds-barred stare-down, had to end for Louise to start breathing normally again. Actually, considering they somewhat restrained themselves in front of me, their potential brother-in-law, they should also restrain themselves in front of Louise, their potential sister-in-law. If you think about it that way, Louise shouldn't need to be scared, but if only she wasn't his first love. Unfortunately, while the potential sister-in-law was just potential, the title of my man's first love was still ongoing. Because of this, Louise gets scared and hides in a corner when those two clash, and with the potential sister-in-law out of sight, those two engage in an even fiercer verbal battle. It was a terrible, vicious cycle. Damn that bastard. I glared at Eric, who was still eating cake. In the end, wasn't it Eric's fault for first enchanting those two, second, for being oblivious despite enchanting them, and lastly, for falling for Louise only to be rejected? It was a miraculous grand slam. Still, I guess we should be grateful it hadn't escalated to physical conflict yet. I decided to stay glued to the booth like a totem for the rest of the club fair. It seemed like the other club members, not just Louise, secretly wanted this too. From the perspective of those who were engaged in their own peaceful yet hopeless love races, this fierce verbal battle must have been terrifying to watch. At least the Mage Duchess didn't care whether these youngsters fought or not, but conversely, she couldn't intervene on my behalf because they were too young. It wouldn't be appropriate for a 120-year-old to get involved in a fight between 19 and 18-year-olds. Please, let it end soon. So, I prayed desperately. Please, let this club fair end even a day earlier. A natural disaster like a sudden typhoon or a hailstorm would be a perfect reason for an early closure. Chapter 303. How far did you research? 7. Indeed, my decision was not wrong. Giving up the competition and bowing our heads was the right choice. While Ernesto Academy bowing its head during my tenure as principal was my personal karma, the students receiving teachings from the Mage Duchess were a blessing for all of Yuban. Gaining something so extraordinary at just the expense of tarnishing the name of an old man, what an undeserved gift. As expected of Ernesto's descendants, you grasp things quickly. Moreover, the Mage Duchess positively mentioned Yuban's hero and referred to us, who couldn't even touch our mentor's toe, as descendants. What an honor this was. The students seemed to feel the same way, their faces flushed or smiling from ear to ear. I didn't blame them for showing emotions unbefitting of mages, who should always maintain a calm demeanor. If I were young, I would have reacted the same way. While the Empire's mages and Yuban's mages may be separated by the borders of nations, the truth remains, both drive the progress of magic on this continent. The advancement of one side fuels my own ambition, and my ambition fuels competition. It is through unending competition that true progress is made. The Mage Duchess continued with a slight smile while looking at the students. Although we were divided by borders and nationalities, we were comrades striving for the progress of continental magic. Competition was natural, but even that competition would lead to the continent's development and magic. Indeed, these were wise words. That was why it was all the more moving. With such a pioneer of continental magic holding such noble ideals, the future of the magical world was incredibly bright. Do not think of the advice I've given as everything you need. Use it merely as a stepping stone as you move forward. With those words, the Mage Duchess left the classroom. It felt a bit bitter. I felt a sense of loss, as if I had been banished from a paradise where everything was abundant and perfect. However, we couldn't be consumed by that sense of loss. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't have even set foot in such a paradise, let alone hear the voice of its god. How could we dare to feel dissatisfied? The Mage Duchess may have called her teachings a mere stepping stone, but for me, they would remain a guiding landmark for the rest of my life. So let's not forget today. If we progress based on these teachings, someday we might surpass the Imperial Academy. Didn't the Mage Duchess say that competition was natural? No, I may have lost now, but in the future, we will win. Excuse me, are you Professor Kurt Scher? Just as I was preparing to return to my quarters to reflect on the lessons before the inspiration faded, someone approached me. A young man with black hair, black eyes, and a black uniform. It's the prosecutor's office's executive manager. As a mage, I couldn't not know him. Apart from being the Empire's executive manager, he was also the Mage Duchess's fiancé. What could this be about? Hopefully, it wasn't anything too troublesome. Unfortunately, no, fortunately, the early termination due to natural disasters didn't happen. Right, a club fair filled with students' passion couldn't end so anticlimactically. That was only natural. Thanks to that, I had been spending my time as a statue-like totem at the booth, but now I need to step away for a moment. Kurt Scher. I recalled the information I had hurriedly crammed into my head. He was the principal of Ernesto Academy and a big name in the magical and educational circles of the United Kingdom of Yuban. It was easier to think of him as the Yuban version of our principal. They say he had quite a fiery personality in his younger days, just like our principal who was active in the military when he was young. What a bother. And now, I had to go meet him. Honestly, it was annoying. While I was happy to have an excuse to leave my post as a booth totem, the idea of negotiating with a foreigner I'd never met wasn't exactly thrilling. But what could I do? The principal had practically begged me to go, and, after hearing his reasoning, I had to admit it was a compelling request. We planned to sell cookies to Ernesto Academy separately from the auction. From the first statement, it was clear this wasn't going to be simple. After deciding to hold an auction to avoid confusion, they were now planning to supply cookies separately to people who weren't even their own citizens. It was unusual. Of course, knowing that the principal wouldn't make such a decision without reason, I listened silently. Indeed, he promptly provided a valid explanation. The funds an academy can mobilize and those that nobles can are on different scales. The former is strictly limited to given budgets and predetermined uses, so there's bound to be a limit to what can be squeezed out. Coming from a fellow academy principal, the argument was incredibly persuasive. While we don't need to consider individual circumstances in the auction, we must take into account that Ernesto Academy has swallowed its pride to come all the way to the empire. Since they've already humbled themselves, we need to ensure they gain as much practical benefit as possible to maintain a smooth relationship. That's complicated. Hearing this, I realized how difficult the world of mages was. Wasn't it common practice to exploit an opening to the fullest when the other side swallowed their pride? However, it seemed that mages refrained from one-sidedly defeating their counterparts, probably because they frequently needed to interact with each other. Therefore, we'll supply them with cookies, but in return, we won't accept money. Instead, we'll aim for something else. The principal's following remarks were impressive. Since the nobles would be throwing gold coins at the auction anyway, he suggested we should get something that only mages from Ernesto Academy could provide. For example, seminars where mages from across the continent gathered, disputes over research papers, joint magical development projects, or excavation of ancient ruins. The plan was full of ways to pressure Ernesto Academy into concessions in a variety of fields. The ideas spilled out so readily that it was clear these were long-standing frustrations. Perhaps the principal had accumulated this much resentment over the years. Aren't concessions a matter of practical benefit? They've already indicated that they want the Mage Duchess's teachings and cookies. They came all the way to the Empire for this, which means they're likely willing to give up other things. I didn't fully understand the mages' ways, so I just went along with it. If the expert says so, then it must be right. However, it's tricky for mages to directly mention concessions, and it would draw too much attention if the principals were to meet now. It would be best if the executive manager could meet them under the pretense of overseeing the auction. Everything made sense until that last part. Auction overseer. I was just a figurehead advisor to the pastry club. They only listed me as the auction coordinator for formality's sake. Honestly, I still found it strange. Why was it so taboo for mages to even mention concessions? It wasn't like they were fragile teenagers with overly sensitive egos. This level of diplomatic rhetoric felt almost pathological. Still, I bit my tongue out of respect for the principal. If someone as competent as him personally requested my help, it must have been a genuinely delicate situation. Excuse me, are you Professor Kurt Scher? So here we were. It felt a bit self-deprecating that my reason for meeting with a foreign VIP was to sell cookies. I've taken on the role of overseeing this auction through my connection with Her Grace, the Mage Duchess. I wanted to greet you and have a meaningful conversation. That's an interesting proposal. At least it seemed like it would be a smooth conversation. The club fair's profits were split half and half between the academy and the clubs. It might seem odd for the academy to take profits earned by the club's hard work, but it was tradition. Besides, nobles wouldn't be fixated on the money earned from booths anyway. They saw it as a gesture of gratitude for the academy's teachings. Therefore, each club focused on their booth's performance rather than on profits themselves. The pastry club was also the same last year. But not anymore. 7 cookies sold to Count Felon for 12 gold coins each. Wow! The auction finally began on the last day of the club fair. As the nominal auction organizer, I barely managed to hold back an exclamation. If no one had been watching, I might have given them a standing ovation. The Mage Duchess, who was an honorary member of the pastry club, had contributed the cookies as auction items. Thanks to this, they reached the outlandish conclusion that this auction's profits would count as income for the pastry club's booth. The Mage Duchess said she wasn't interested in the profits and it felt wrong for the academy to claim 100% of it, so they must have compromised. The result, the pastry club's earnings were skyrocketing. It was a mad auction where anything below gold coins wasn't even mentioned, with insane amounts equaling or surpassing my annual salary being casually thrown around. And that was the price even with a decent amount of supply being released. They're worth more than I am. With a bitter feeling, I looked towards where the auction participants were seated and saw Kurt share with a dumbfounded expression. Fortunately, our conversation ended smoothly, and Ernesto Academy managed to secure an appropriate amount of cookies. But even so, seeing the current auction must be overwhelming. If they hadn't made a deal with us behind the scenes, Ernesto Academy would have had to participate in this crazy auction and compete with money. Of course, the more overwhelmed they were, the more grateful they'd be to us for offering the backdoor deal. Hold on to that gratitude for a long time, foreigner. Oh, Opa, do we really get to keep half of this? Just as I was about to turn my attention back to the auctioneer, Louise, who had come to watch the auction as part of the pastry club, spoke with a trembling voice. Right, she must be shocked too. How could anyone keep their composure while watching this insane auction where each item was going for over 10 gold coins? Moreover, Louise came from a barony, which was far from wealthy. Can't we just give it all to teacher? I patted Louise's head at her almost tearful voice. It was a cute question regardless of whether she was intimidated by the overwhelming amount or just lacked greed. Our club president must be happy about the increased club budget. I'm not happy. I couldn't help but smile after seeing Louise's even more tearful face. Sorry, but that's money you'll have to manage. What can we do if the Mage Duchess won't take it? Don't think too negatively. At least the Gold Duke isn't involved. If he were, the prices would have been at least 5 times higher. Ader, who had been watching the scene, offered a faint smile to console her. I couldn't be sure if that really counted as comfort, but I suppose it was meant to ease her nerves. The situation could have been worse, so maybe she shouldn't feel so bad. 5 times. Unfortunately, that comfort didn't reach Louise. The terrifying words, 5 times, seemed to have short-circuited her brain. But it was true. If the Gold Duke had graced the auction, he would have crushed the other competitors with money. Come to think of it, it is strange. The Gold Duke is famous even in Yuban, so why isn't he participating in something like this? He didn't even send a proxy. It's like he's completely stepped away. The other club members whispered among themselves, speculating about the Gold Duke's absence. The Mage Duchess's special cookies were a once-in-a-lifetime auction item, so why had he stayed out of it? As if he gave up. The club members might not know, but the Gold Duke hasn't given up. On the contrary, he was the first to contact me. Executive manager, I heard an interesting rumor that the Mage Duchess has made something fascinating. Yes, that's correct. I'll pay a price you won't be disappointed with, so send me 30 of them. He bypassed the auction entirely, opting to purchase directly from me. And indeed, he sent an amount that was far from disappointing. I didn't feel particularly guilty. Wasn't it natural for high-ranking individuals to live comfortably? Besides, if the Gold Duke had personally participated in the auction, he would have taken all of them, not just 30. Wasn't that fortunate for everyone else? 6 cookies sold to Count Stinel for 14 gold coins each. Watching people happily buy their share made me feel good, too. Chapter 304. Like older brother, like younger brother, the pastry club managed to secure first place at the club fair for the 2nd year in a row. It wasn't particularly surprising, as we had anticipated this result even before the club fair began. This year, the cookies made by the Mage Duchess herself were counted towards our club's performance. If we couldn't get first place with that, we'd have to suspect foul play. And now, it was time to think about other things beyond the small honor of first place. Here, this your share, Eric. Thanks. I couldn't help but smile wryly as a heavy pouch was placed in my hand. After selling the cookies made by the Mage Duchess, it was decided that half of the proceeds would go to the pastry club. No matter how I looked at it, this wasn't money we should be keeping, but what could we do if the Mage Duchess said she didn't need it? The academy also reluctantly took only half, and even that seemed forced. So the club, and its leader, suddenly found themselves with a large sum of money. Louise, who had literally become rich overnight, was overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. The club members, including myself, comforted Louise, telling her to use it freely. Or more accurately, we treated it like it wasn't our problem, as if we were watching a fire from across the river. Let's divide it among everyone. And this was the result. In the end, Louise counted the gold coins with trembling hands, committing the outrageous act of dividing all the profits equally among the club members. Unable to shoulder the burden alone, she used a merciless tactic to make everyone her accomplice. What should I do with this? It was a terrible method, but it was certainly effective. I now felt the same burden that Louise was carrying. Of course, Ainter, Rudies, Lather, and Tannion weren't fazed. As members of the imperial or royal families, why would they be surprised by money? They were surprised that selling cookies could earn such an amount, not by the amount itself. So they just smiled at Louise, who was insistently begging them to take it, without showing any other reaction. But I was an ordinary noble. Honestly, it was a bit disingenuous to call the Crossius family ordinary, but compared to the imperial and royal families, we were. Moreover, I was just the second son and not even the heir. I wasn't in a position to treat such amounts casually. This is Sarah's share. Louise's voice grew strangely brighter with each share she handed out. By the time she reached Sarah, her last victim, her voice was almost sing-song. I really don't need it. I didn't do anything. There's no one here who did nothing. Everyone worked hard, so it's okay to accept it. Louise forcibly pressed the pouch into Sarah's hands, ignoring her protests. It was strange, the conversation seemed heartwarming on the surface, but why did it feel like an act of villainy? Sarah's teary-eyed expression looked less like she was touched and more like she was terrified. It's understandable, though. I couldn't help but smile, understanding how Sarah must feel. If even I, from an imperial count family, found this burdensome, then how did Sarah, from a mere baronial family, feel? Moreover, Sarah had mostly stayed in the mansion and was far from luxury, so she must have found the very concept of gold coins unfamiliar. And now, she had received several of them. Please take it. I think I'll feel better if you do. At Louise's sincere words, Sarah looked at me with trembling eyes, as if begging me to stop Louise. I'm sorry. I gently shook my head at Sarah. I'm sorry, but it's impossible. I wouldn't have accepted it myself if I could have stopped her. Hung might have been able to stop her, but he was currently absent. If it's too burdensome to keep, then why don't you send it to Nanny? She'd be happy to know it's the first money you've earned yourself. Should I? Not wanting Sarah to feel betrayed, I offered a suitable suggestion. Fortunately, it seemed like a good answer, as she nodded. Now that I'd said it out loud, it did seem like a good idea. I should send mine to Mother too. Then, she could use it for the family, for the territory, or however she saw fit. Even if it ended up as her personal funds, she'd probably use it more wisely than I would. A banquet was held on the evening of the club fair's award ceremony. The competition during the club fair was just an academy event, so this banquet was meant to put all emotions to rest, or so they say, but in reality, it was just a banquet. It was all about ending the festival on a happy note. Since most guests usually leave before the award ceremony, the banquet was essentially just for the academy students. For students who had been dealing with their seniors in the name of their junior club members, it was a comfortable and welcome occasion. Eric. Oh, Nuna. So, I didn't expect Zenobia Nuna to still be here. Of course, guests leave early because they are busy, not because the academy urged them to. But wasn't Zenobia Nuna a countess of the empire? She must be busier than anyone else, so I assumed she'd left already. Congratulations on first place. You worked hard. Zenobia Nuna handed me a handkerchief with a bright smile. I couldn't help but smile at the unexpected gift. I was thinking of giving you a bouquet, but I thought a handkerchief might be better. Do they still wear out quickly these days? Always. That's a long time if it lasts 3 months. Rolling around during training caused my handkerchiefs to wear out quickly. It had been like that since I was young, so it hadn't changed, and I'd been regularly buying new ones. I was just about to buy a new one, and now I'd received this. Thank you. I'll use it well. Good. Be careful with it this time. After saying that, Zenobia Nuna turned to Sarah and spoke first. Hello, Sarah. It's getting late, and you still have to attend the banquet. Aren't you tired? I couldn't help but smile at her concern for the somewhat frail Sarah. It was nice to see them getting along, considering they had just met during this club fair. I'm fine. If I couldn't handle this much, I wouldn't have enrolled. I'm more touched that you, Countess, are still here despite your busy schedule. Sarah seemed pleased by Zenobia Nuna's words since she responded with a slight smile. To be honest, I was touched, too. I would have understood if she'd left after just one day, but she stayed until the last day of the booth's operation, contributing to sales. And now she's even staying for the banquet to congratulate us. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't grateful. I'm the one who said I'd help you, Nuna, but you beat me to it. I feel a bit embarrassed. I joked, and Zenobia Nuna's eyes widened in surprise. I guess she didn't expect me to bring up our childhood memories suddenly. It's embarrassing for me to talk about my childhood too, but after being teased by Sarah about my night talk, I figured one more embarrassing memory wouldn't hurt. You remember that? I nodded at Zenobia Nuna, who muttered in surprise. I might not be perfect physically, but my memory wasn't too bad. I might forget what others say, but I remember what I say. Of course, the best would be to remember both. If that was impossible due to memory limitations, then I should at least remember what I had said myself. Maintaining relationships becomes much easier that way. Unlike last year, we decided to go to the banquet separately this time. Louise would enter with the advisor and Eric needed some quality time with Sarah, so moving as a club would be inconvenient. Besides, with Louise, Eric, and Sarah gone, only 4 gloomy guys would be left, and I didn't particularly want to enter the banquet hall with just them. Armane's knights escorted ladies to banquets, not other men. So, I was planning to rest in my quarters before heading to the banquet when... Well, this is a mess. I spotted Eric, Sarah, and Countess Horfeld gathered near the banquet hall. I didn't expect an outside guest to still be at the academy. At the same time, I was impressed. Someone who defied common sense for their goal was a rare, indomitable spirit even in Armine. I just didn't expect to see it in a love triangle. At least she's an outsider, I guess. Fortunately, Countess Horfeld was an outside guest and not an academy staff member. That meant she'd be able to stay for the banquet as part of the club fair schedule, but that she'd have no reason to be at the academy after this. At least we wouldn't have to witness the confrontations between Sarah and Countess Horfeld anymore. That aside, I was impressed for a different reason now. Why doesn't he get it? I couldn't help but think this after looking at Eric, who was stuck between Sarah and Countess Horfeld. I knew Sarah had feelings for Eric the moment I saw her, and it was the same with Countess Horfeld. Even a dense guy like me who could barely take care of himself could see it, so why couldn't the person involved? I'd understand it if Eric was completely uninterested in romance, but considering he had a crush on Louise, that wasn't the case at all. He even noticed it when Louise fell for our advisor. He wasn't oblivious to love, so why on earth is he doing this on purpose? I even started to wonder if he was pretending to be dense because he didn't know how to make a decision. However, that expression was genuine. It wasn't an act but one of pure denseness. I almost wish it were an act, to be honest. Rudy's. I heard Ainter's voice behind me as I was watching the three with mixed feelings. What are you doing hiding? Ainter, who had turned his head following my gaze, quickly shut his mouth and hid behind the tree like me. Shall we turn back? That might be best. I nodded at the wise suggestion. I definitely didn't have the courage to get between them. He'll figure it out. Just before turning away, I looked at Eric, who was still wearing that serene smile. Yeah, he'd sort it out eventually. Even though he was shockingly oblivious now that he was the one being loved, he wasn't someone who neglected his responsibilities. At the very least, he wouldn't end up hurting either of them, hopefully. The advisor was like this, too. Suddenly, I remembered last year's second semester. Back then when we were all acting ridiculous over our crushes on Louise, and the advisor had been pulling his hair out trying to help us. But when Louise started to show her feelings for him, he was completely oblivious, a miraculous feat. Eric was now showing that same miracle. I never expected he'd show off his brotherhood with the advisor so blatantly. Chapter 305. Fools who are happy just by seeing each other's faces. 1. The banquet celebrating the end of the club fair was quite impressive. Irina, who had been tied up in preparing the gardening club's booth, finally joined us. With her addition, I boldly entered the banquet hall with 4 ladies. Thanks to that, we received some pretty heated glances. If we got that much attention with just 4, imagine how intense it would be if all 6 of us were together. It was a moment that gave me a strange respect for the Gold Duke. Of course, I was past the stage of being swayed by others' gazes. After all, it wasn't like I was in a position where I needed to be considerate of others, they were the ones who should be watching me. If I carried myself with confidence, it didn't matter how others looked at me. I just realized this a bit late. But even with that realization, I couldn't help but find the banquet impressive due to a scene that was beyond my control. What an idiot. I massaged the back of my neck as yesterday's events came flooding back. The sight of Eric stuck between Sarah and Countess Horfeld was a situation where even my newfound confidence was meaningless. As his brother, what solution could I possibly offer him when my little brother was digging his own grave? To be honest, I almost had a PTSD episode when I first saw him between the two women, remembering last year's banquet for the Crown Princess's birthday. But seeing Eric's calm expression amidst it all quickly brought me back down. While I was busy being overly conscious of the two, that bastard didn't show even a hint of awareness. I'm the one who fell off the horse. It was strange. Clearly, it was my body that experienced the fall, so why did it seem like it was Eric's intelligence and awareness that became damaged? Do brothers' bodies synchronize somehow? Anyway, between Sarah and the Count of Horfelt's intense verbal sparring, the pastry club members gawking at Eric's calm demeanor despite being flanked by two women, and the general chaos surrounding the infamous executive manager's brother, the banquet turned into an unforgettable event etched into everyone's memory. At least he didn't dance. I rubbed my neck even harder as I felt a headache coming on. Yeah, at least Eric didn't dance. If he had, it would have been chaos depending on who he danced with first. Perhaps thanks to divine intervention, or maybe just exhaustion, Eric declined all the offers to dance, claiming that he was too tired. His firm refusals left both Sarah and the Countess silent. After all, dancing was meant to build goodwill, but forcing someone uninterested to participate would have been absurd. But was he really tired? Could it be that he sensed something was off and made an excuse? No way. I quickly dismissed that thought. Absolutely not. If he had that level of intelligence and awareness left, then things wouldn't have gotten to this point. Besides, Eric wasn't maliciously ignorant. He wouldn't knowingly ignore other people's emotions without good reason. He had even experienced unrequited love himself, so he wouldn't be indifferent to such feelings. It's been a while since I've made tea myself, so it took longer than I expected. Gerhard returned with the tea as I continued rubbing my neck, smiling lightly. Well then, it seems you'll need to bring in a new assistant teacher soon. Haha, I'd like to, but history isn't very popular. I guess I'll have to improve my tea-making skills in the meantime. I lowered my hand from my neck since there were now eyes around me and replied, only to receive a somewhat sad answer. It was clearly meant to be a joke, but why did it make my heart feel heavy? Still, judging by Gerhardt's expression, he didn't seem dissatisfied with the lack of an assistant. Well, someone who'd fret over a single staff member wouldn't be researching history, especially something as niche as the Northern Nomads. He might even prefer being able to focus on research without anyone to look after. Besides, after having Miss Christina as an assistant, I doubt anyone else would measure up. Gerhardt's shrug gave me mixed feelings. It was like watching a professor praise a graduated doctoral student, or a slave owner mourning the loss of a good slave. Of course, it was an unfair thought to both Gerhardt and Christina, so I quickly brushed it off. For individuals who dedicated themselves to the pursuit of knowledge and progress, likening them to slaves or masters was an insult. After all, they were martyrs who willingly chose a challenging path. Next time we meet, she'll be a teacher and not an assistant, right? So, I tried to change the subject, but I was surprised when Gerhardt quietly shook his head. His reaction sent a chill down my spine. What did that mean? Didn't she already have her thesis deadline extended? Did her defense fail? What should I do? Guilt started to creep in. Even though the deadline for Christina's thesis had been extended, she was still forced to rush a new one, which inevitably affected its quality. In the end, it was because I threw Christina's thesis in the trash that she failed to escape her master's degree. At this rate, I might need to plead with the compilation department. She's completed her time as an assistant teacher, but you won't see teacher Christina at the academy while you're here as an executive manager. Hearing that she did manage to earn her master's degree brought me a wave of relief. At least I hadn't ruined someone's life. So there was no need to bring this up with the compilation department, after all. But this raised a new question. While it made sense for her to be taking some time off during the early stages of her married life, Christina had always struck me as highly motivated. I would have thought she'd dive straight into teaching as soon as she shed the assistant teacher title. Apparently, Christina recently received a life from Enon. She's decided to raise it herself without a nanny. Gerhardt quickly explained, as if reading my confusion. I see, so it wasn't just a honeymoon break, but a maternity and childcare leave, too. That's wonderful news. That damn second manager, how could he keep something this important from me? It was a superior's duty to immediately scold a subordinate who didn't share the good news. Congratulations on the baby. The second manager let out a dry laugh at my abrupt congratulations. What? Where did you hear that? From your wife's former boss. The second manager frowned at my words before letting out a small gasp. This bastard completely forgot about Gerhardt's existence. Anyway, seemingly touched by his superior's direct congratulations, the second manager kept letting out awkward laughter. He must be so happy he couldn't do anything but laugh. I was trying to keep it under wraps, but I guess it didn't work. But happiness aside, I had to press him on this. His comment just confirmed that he had intentionally withheld the news. You tried to hide the fact that you're having a baby. I was planning to tell everyone when the time was right. They say you need to be careful about even small things in early pregnancy, and I didn't want to cause any unnecessary commotion. As much as it sounded like an excuse, it was a reasonable explanation. Having no experience with pregnancy myself, I couldn't exactly argue with him. And I heard that during pregnancy, you shouldn't look at unsightly things. You little shit. Suddenly, I had become an unsightly thing. This bastard really had no filter with his superior. What's wrong? Honestly, is there anything worse than the third manager doing somersaults or the first manager bringing weird things as gifts? This time, his words were so perfect that I couldn't say anything. What's worse was that I could easily picture it in my head. The inherently unsightly third manager doing somersaults to congratulate the pregnancy, and the first manager bringing nightmarish objects as gifts. I could also vividly imagine Christina fainting at the sight. If I were in the second manager's position, I'd probably want to avoid that, too. As I kept my mouth shut, the second manager nodded with a smug expression, as if to say, now you understand my intentions, right? So, please keep this a secret for now, executive manager. This was the heartfelt wish of a family man who wanted to show only good things to his wife and the child she was carefully nurturing. It was truly beautiful and applause-worthy. I'm sorry, pardon, but it was already too late. In the past, I would have immediately contacted the second manager upon hearing news about him. Then, after witnessing his paternal instincts and sense of responsibility, I would have kept quiet, thinking, even this crazy guy is sincere when it comes to his family. However, I now had a prospective family of my own. I'd found someone I could contact first when I heard something interesting or fun. I already told Elizabeth. I quietly ended the call as the second manager let out what sounded like a death rattle. But was it just my imagination? Just before I hung up, I thought I heard the first manager's voice calling for the second manager. Well, it didn't matter. After all, the more people congratulating him, the merrier, right? That night, the first manager contacted me first. This is too much, really. How can he hide that they're having a baby? Is he ashamed of us? I couldn't bring myself to deny the first manager's words, which were accompanied by indignant snorts. I understood all too well why the second manager had kept quiet. It's his first child. He was probably being cautious. I just stated the obvious and tried to remain neutral. Fortunately, the first manager wasn't in the mood to complain further as she didn't argue with me, or perhaps she had already vented all her disappointment to the second manager earlier. I'm sorry, second manager. I'll admit I was reckless this time. Knowing your reputation, I assumed you were keeping quiet for a trivial reason. I heard from Senior today, too. Hiding things must be the trend these days. I almost nodded absent-mindedly but froze mid-motion. Senior. There was only one person she referred to as Senior, right? Senior. Yep, she got pregnant at the end of last year but kept it secret just in case. She's entering a stable period now, so it seems they're planning to announce it soon. The first manager delivered this earth-shattering news as casually as if she were discussing her dinner plans, but the implications were far from trivial. Until now, the Crown Prince and Crown Princess hadn't had any children. This meant that the child she was expecting would be the first imperial grandchild and, barring unforeseen events, the future ruler of the empire. So he's human, after all. I was surprised in a different way than when I heard about the second manager's baby. Considering the Crown Prince's behavior, I'd half believed he wasn't even human, but seeing that he was having a child, I guess he was biologically one. I should at least give my congratulations. The birth of the first imperial grandchild was a monumental occasion. If I hadn't known about it, I could have let it slide. But now that I did, it would be inappropriate to ignore it. Even though the official announcement hadn't been made yet, the Crown Princess shared the news with the first manager knowing it would reach me. Offering congratulations before the other nobility started stirring up chaos felt like the right thing to do. Fortunately, tomorrow was the weekend, so I'd have time for a brief visit to the capital. While I was at it, I should see the first manager and the fourth manager, too. Thank goodness she's still in the capital. I thought the fourth manager would be dispatched to the north as soon as I went to the academy, but they were surprisingly still active domestically. Thanks to that, we were able to communicate daily through the communication crystal. Didn't she say they were going to extract dragon blood before heading north? Either way, the fourth manager had been working hard. If she was still near the capital for dragon-related missions, then I should make sure to meet her. Chapter 306. Fools who are happy just by seeing each other's faces too. As soon as dawn broke, I rushed to the Mage Duchess to ask for a teleport. She gave me a suspicious look when I suddenly said I was going to the capital, but she agreed right away when I explained I'd finish quickly and meet the first and fourth managers. Being the eldest among the lovers, she became incredibly lenient when it came to issues involving the others. It was a good thing. Baby, are you sure it's nothing serious? It's not another probation, is it? It's nothing like that. Honestly, I couldn't even get in trouble if I tried, there's no reason for it. Instead, worry and doubt lingered in the Mage Duchess's eyes until the moment I arrived in the capital. It hurt a bit to be thought of as a delinquent civil servant who was always getting disciplined, but unfortunately, it wasn't entirely wrong. Most times I had to go to the capital during my academy assignment were for disciplinary reasons, so it was understandable to think that this trip might be for the same reason. If it were for punishment, I'd be too embarrassed to mention it, let alone ask you for a teleport. It's just a quick errand, so don't worry. I hugged her as she continued to gaze at me with those worried, glistening eyes. Honestly, who would brag about a punishment to their significant other and request a teleportation spell for it? I would have just slipped away quietly if that were the case. Besides, if I were in trouble, the Crown Prince himself would send a teleportation mage to drag me to the capital. Saying it like this makes him sound like a slave hunter, though. Alright, I understand, but if anything happens, make sure to tell me. The Mage Duchess hugged me back and whispered softly as I hugged her. Of course, if anyone tried to bully me through unofficial means rather than discipline, I was fully prepared to counterattack with Mage Duchess power. On another note, I was glad the Mage Duchess seemed to have built up some tolerance for skinship. She used to tremble like crazy at the slightest touch. I'll tell you right away, so rest at my mansion. The butler will show you around. No sooner had I finished speaking that I felt a familiar vibration. This steady rhythm, it was definitely the Mage Duchess I knew. Still not completely immune, I see. Naturally, showing someone around the mansion implied welcoming them as its lady, so her reaction made sense. Even Margetta mentioned how happy she'd been when the butler showed her around the mansion. Anyway, now that I had shown both Margetta and the Mage Duchess around, I should also give Louise and Irina a tour during the summer vacation. I arrived at the Crown Prince's palace empty-handed. Visiting to offer congratulations for a pregnancy and showing up without a gift might seem odd, but the Crown Princess's pregnancy was still a state secret. In this situation, having the executive manager visit the Crown Prince's palace with a gift would draw too much unwanted attention. Besides, it was practically impossible to choose a gift befitting the imperial family in just a day, so it was better to go in person first and send a gift later. But what should I send? I'd need to have exchanged such gifts before to know what was appropriate. Why does it have to be for the Crown Princess? It was a headache. If it were to congratulate the Crown Prince, a few bottles of liquor would be enough, but the one who was pregnant was the Crown Princess. I couldn't care less about the Crown Prince's opinion, I needed to pick something she would genuinely like. Something safe like jewelry, but that was too common. And the Crown Princess probably already had any jewelry I could get. Or maybe some fine fabric for baby clothes. It was necessary, but it might be too early for that. Let's think about it later. I gave up after thinking it over a few times. It would be easier to consult with the invincible Duke or discuss it with the butler. Asking Margetta for advice might be a good idea, too. Margetta had many nieces and nephews, so she probably knew what made a good gift. Lately, I have developed an unusual habit. As the Crown Princess entered her 4th month of pregnancy and her belly started to show, touching her stomach became the highlight of my day. It was a habit I couldn't have imagined before, but anyone who had become a father would understand. Knowing that my child was growing inside the belly of the woman I loved, it was only natural to want to look at it more often and touch it as much as possible. Crown Princess, your belly just moved. Did the baby kick or something? And sometimes, while touching her belly, it felt as though I was communicating with the baby. That was me moving, Your Highness. Ah, or maybe not. Strange, I was sure it was our baby playfully kicking to get my attention. What a quiet and thoughtful child. Still, the baby must be refraining from causing too much commotion, not wanting to trouble their mother. Such a kind and considerate little one, This must be because they take after the crown princess. Just as I was thinking this, the crown princess's belly moved slightly. Ah, it just moved. The crown princess stroked her belly with a bright voice. This time, it seemed the child really did kick. To play with their father's emotions already, what a clever child. The future of the empire was truly bright. Your future will be bright, too. With a content heart, I stroked the crown princess's belly again. Unlike my father, who came from a collateral family, and me, who was the eldest son of a concubine, this child was the legitimate heir. The shackles that my father and I inevitably bore from birth wouldn't exist for this child. If this child succeeded me, it would be the first time in a long while that an emperor with true legitimacy would ascend to the throne. Father must feel the same way, so he would probably lend his support to this child's legitimacy. He might even name them crown grandchild before abdicating. It was a truly perfect legitimacy. Knock knock. As I was making a resolve to raise this child well, I heard a knock at the door. Your Highness, the executive manager is here. Sir Hendrik's voice from outside the door made me glance over. It was just yesterday that the crown princess leaked the news of her pregnancy, and he was here already. As expected, he was quick to act. Very well, tell him to come in. Though technically this guest was interrupting my time with the crown princess, he was welcome if he was here to congratulate the crown princess on her pregnancy. After all, happiness grew with every well wish. And how could I not be pleased, especially when the guest coming to congratulate us was going to be a pillar supporting the empire for decades to come. He's only 22 now. I couldn't help but think of the executive manager's age. A young man barely in his 20s, he could easily live another 60 years if he took care of his health. No, with the mage duchess by his side, maybe it'd be even longer. On the other hand, I couldn't guarantee even 40 years, let alone 60. The emperor's duties were heavy, so I'd likely die before the executive manager or abdicate early. So either way, my child would succeed me as emperor, and the executive manager would still be active then. A loyal subject serving 3 generations. The thought brought me peace. Knowing that the executive manager would support my child filled me with confidence. Given his personality, he wouldn't look down on someone younger than him, and being the crown princess's child, he wouldn't treat them coldly. Thinking about it, it was a bit disappointing. If only the executive manager could live 120 years instead of 60, I'd be truly at ease. I flinched at the sight that greeted me as soon as I opened the door. The crown princess was sitting in a chair, and the crown prince was kneeling before her. What was this? If the crown prince was kneeling, then did that mean I should kneel, too? No, wait, if the crown prince stopped at kneeling, did that mean I had to lie flat on the floor? Your Highness, it will be awkward for the executive manager if you stay like that. Oh no, I've shown an embarrassing sight to the executive manager. Thankfully, the crown prince stood up when the crown princess spoke gently. As expected of the crown princess, the only conscience in the imperial family. I knew I could count on her. Karl Crossius, heir to the Crossius family and executive manager of the Ministry of Finance, greets the small sun and moon of the empire. Welcome, it's good to see your face even with your busy schedule. I quickly bowed deeply once the crown prince was standing, and he responded in a calm voice. If he knew I was busy, then wouldn't it be better not to call me in the first place? Leaking the pregnancy news to the first manager was practically the same as telling me to come. Still, this was about the imperial grandchild. I'll let it slide. Yes, I'll endure it, but why are you looking at me like that? As I straightened up, my eyes met the crown prince's. His eyes were filled with an incredibly bizarre emotion that was uncomfortable to describe. What was with this bastard? His expression was never great to begin with, but now it was downright creepy. His gaze reminded me of a dog catcher spotting a stray in some rural backwater. How could I stay still after hearing such joyous news for the entire empire? I offer my sincerest congratulations, Your Highness. Instinctively repelled by his gaze, I hurriedly changed the subject. I came to offer my congratulations, after all, not to leave in terror. As always, the executive manager's loyalty is admirable. You flatter me. Fortunately, it seemed to be a successful change of subject, as the crown prince nodded with a satisfied expression. I, too, will greatly celebrate when I hear of the executive manager's joyous news, so be sure to bring me the news quickly. Or not, did I change to the wrong subject? It was clearly a blessing for a prospective groom, but something about it felt strangely off. Was I just imagining that it sounded more like a command to produce heirs to serve the empire? Executive manager. But it was still a blessing, so I was responding with appropriate, yes, yes when I heard the Crown Princess's voice. Thank you for coming to congratulate us in person. Even the baby seems happy to see you, judging by the way they're moving. Smiling warmly, she gently stroked her belly. Watching her, the Crown Prince knelt again, placing his hand on her stomach with a tender expression. It was heartwarming to see such familial love, but couldn't they do this when there were no subjects around? As a subordinate, it was very awkward to see my superior kneeling. Thank you for your kind words. If the imperial grandchild thinks fondly of me, perhaps they will also look kindly upon my children who will serve them. It was awkward, but I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I offered a polite smile and a safe, neutral reply. Of course, the executive manager will be a loyal minister serving this child, so why would they look unfavorably upon your children? Question mark. You son of a… What the hell did you mean by that, you bastard? Even for a crown prince, that was crossing the line. Did he just imply I should serve this imperial grandchild and that my children should serve their descendants? Who was I, the next Wang Wei who was forced to serve multiple generations of emperors? Even Wang Wei retired before King Sejong died. Was he even human? It would be truly reassuring to have the executive manager watching over this child. But seeing the crown princess's eyes sparkle with joy, I couldn't bring myself to deny it. You're too kind, your highness. Damn it. Chapter 307. Fools who are happy just by seeing each other's faces. 3. I tried to escape, feeling like I was about to be bound as a lifelong servant to the imperial family, but I was caught by the crown princess's invitation to at least have a meal before leaving. It was hard to refuse an offer to stay for food. Of course, I could have politely declined. Eating at someone else's house first thing in the morning could feel burdensome, and her invitation might have just been a polite gesture. But after that last conversation basically amounted to, "You're a slave, I'll pass down to my child," how could I run away without looking bad? If I ran off now, they'd likely continue discussing that topic, and the idea of inheriting me as a slave could turn from an offhand remark into a concrete plan. I needed to prevent that. Having breakfast together like this makes us feel like family. It's incredibly reassuring. His words made my skin crawl. Family, my foot. You're acting more like a leech than a family. You honor me with your words, your highness. How can you say such things to a mere servant who's nothing more than a guest? Even a guest becomes like family if you spend enough time together. I do not doubt that the executive manager will become such a guest to the imperial family. That sent another shiver down my spine. Was this some twisted declaration of endless servitude? This man had the mindset of a slave driver. If there was any justice in reincarnation, then I hope he ends up with a boss just like him in his next life. Fufu, who knows, we might really become family. And with the crown princess's finishing blow, I could only manage an awkward smile. Unlike the crown prince's horrifying words, the crown princess's words unfortunately had a decent chance of coming true. From the crown princess's perspective, I was someone close to her father, the invincible duke, so I was trustworthy, while from the crown prince's view, I was from an imperial family that had sworn its loyalty for over 300 years. Considering the issues caused by the backgrounds of the current empress and empress dowager, I might be a good choice. Of course, I hated the idea. I was already going crazy, so how much more would I suffer if I were connected to the imperial family? Perhaps there would be checks against too much power concentrated in one family. Wait, that might actually work out. On second thought, wasn't that a good thing? Political meddling would give me the perfect excuse to resign. There was no better justification than that for handing in my letter of resignation. I suddenly felt at peace. Still, I didn't have the conscience to push for an arranged marriage actively. I'd leave it to fate. Maybe one of my kids would be charming enough to captivate an imperial. I wouldn't mind if the tables turned and an imperial grandchild fell for one of my children. The crown princess is right. With how prosperous the executive manager's family is bound to be, it's entirely possible for your lineage to intertwine with the imperial family. It was strange. The crown prince was saying the same thing as the crown princess, but it sounded so much more sinister coming from him. I guess the messenger was indeed more important than the message. By the way, I envy the executive manager. With so many wives, you must experience the joy of having children many times over. I became certain after seeing the crown prince burst into laughter. The messenger really was more important. I might have taken it as a simple blessing if someone else had said it, but it felt like a provocation coming from this bastard. But what could I do? His status meant I couldn't openly insult him, and with the crown princess present, even indirect barbs felt risky. All I could do was grin and bear it. Thankfully, his comment about wives gave someone else the perfect opening to intervene. So your highness is saying you're less happy because you have fewer wives, right? Her voice was noticeably colder than before. The crown prince's smile froze in place, his expression turning stiff. What an idiot. I felt an instant wave of relief. That's what you get for running your mouth carelessly. I finished the meal with a light heart and escaped from the crown prince's palace. Although there was an incident that upset the crown princess, that anger was directed entirely at the crown prince, so I could comfortably watch from the sidelines. What a fool. For someone with just one wife, commenting on the number of wives was a flashy way to self-destruct since others might misunderstand it as envy for having many wives. Unfortunately, the crown princess was one of those who misunderstood. I hope this will serve as a lesson for the crown prince to stop running his mouth. Wasn't there an old saying that the mouth was the gateway to disaster? He'll manage somehow. Although he just spectacularly self-destructed, this was the same man who survived the second prince faction's relentless assassination attempts before being crowned heir. He should know better than anyone how to watch his words. But thinking about it that way made me even angrier. It meant that he let his guard down while focusing on teasing me. Was he really insane? Bastard. Still, I should quickly put an end to these negative thoughts. Executive manager RRR. I couldn't keep thinking about the crown prince when I was about to see the first manager after so long. The first manager came running out of the Maslow family mansion. I'd have to go to the prosecutor's office to see her on a weekday, but she was at the mansion since it was the weekend. I was worried she might have gone to work on the weekend, but thankfully she hadn't. Have you been well? I waved and greeted the first manager as she approached. We talked just yesterday. Of course I've been well. Talking and seeing you in person is different. At those words, the first manager grinned and poked my side. She must have really liked what I just said. Hee, but it's troublesome if you come all the way to the capital just to see me. Executive manager, are you having trouble adapting to the academy? I'm sorry, but I'm adapting well. Having 3 workforce units unlike last year made things incredibly comfortable. Honestly, I was even starting to forget about the capital. Of course, I held back from saying this since I knew the first manager would immediately flop down and start whining. I came to see Her Highness the Crown Princess. I didn't intend to hide the truth, though. If it weren't for the news about the imperial grandchild, I wouldn't have come today. Wow, is the imperial family more important than your lover? Yes, the first manager protested as if hurt, and I gave a firm, short answer. We both burst into laughter at that. It was true. Nothing was more important than the royal family. They were the ones paying our salaries, after all. Well, I'll let it slide since you came all the way to the mansion. Thanks, I appreciate it. The first manager didn't seem to be truly upset, even linking arms with me as we walked. After all, she was the one who told me about the crown princess's pregnancy. She must have expected me to come to the capital today. Let's go inside. It's still cold in the morning. She grabbed my arm with a bright smile and led me into the mansion. I hummed a tune while preparing tea and snacks. Although I could have asked a maid to do it, I wanted to prepare it myself for the executive manager, whom I hadn't seen in a while. They say lovers are touched when you take care of things personally. Honestly, I'd have preferred to prepare a full meal, but my cooking skills weren't quite there yet, so I had to abandon the idea. A meal was too important to risk experimenting on. Even though the executive ate just about anything without complaint, I still wanted to serve something delicious. Maybe I should learn baking, too. I seriously considered this while looking at the cookies on the plate. The executive manager must be eating Louise's homemade sweets often, and recently, Beatrix Honey had started making cookies, too. How could I just serve store-bought ones when his other lovers were giving him homemade sweets? It would be hard not to compare. Fine, I should start studying it in my spare time. If Beatrix Honey learned it quickly, then there was no reason I couldn't. Is black tea okay? Shouldn't you ask that before brewing it? I pouted at the blunt response. This was supposed to be the part where he says, anything you make is perfect, or something along those lines. Anything is fine, so just serve it. I decided to let it slide since it was close enough. Right, expecting impeccable manners from someone younger than me might be asking too much. This Nuna will let it go. It's been a while since I've seen store-bought snacks. My heart sank when he said that with a slight smile as I set down the refreshments. He probably meant it as a joke rather than criticism, but hearing a comment like that right when I was worrying about baking made me anxious. I need to start studying right away. I should start as soon as the executive manager leaves. No more waiting for free time, I'd make time if I had to. Store-bought ones have a consistent taste, you know. Fair point, I replied as casually as I could. Showing my nerves now would only make him feel awkward. Oh, right, Penelia said she'd be back before dinner. I casually mentioned this to the executive manager as he was drinking tea. He'd probably go see Penelia later this afternoon, but it had been a while since she last saw him too. I couldn't monopolize his time. Really, that's earlier than expected. Extracting dragon's blood doesn't take long once you get past the scales. Surprisingly, Penelia and the masked unit were on a domestic mission rather than being dispatched to the north. They were currently extracting dragon blood, which was considered a high-grade material for mages. Extracting dragon blood required piercing their scales, which not just anyone could do. But once they managed that, it was a quick process. With Penelia's abilities, she could handle it quickly in return. It's 4 dragons this time, right? Yes. Penelia's only dealing with the ones near the capital, the other units are handling the rest. The executive manager nodded calmly at this. Penelia was really working hard. Even 1 dragon would be troublesome, but she was handling 4. Still, I suppose we should be grateful. It wasn't so long ago that 10 dragons lived just around the capital. Compared to that, things were looking much better. I just nodded along as the first manager explained. It had been 6 years since I started living in this world, but hearing about dragons still left me conflicted. In most stories, dragons were either majestic beings of great power or insurmountable forces of evil. Either way, they were typically depicted as an overwhelming force humanity could never hope to defeat. But that wasn't the case here, or at least, it used to be, but it wasn't anymore. Around the early days of Apelles, humanity's magical power and technology developed dramatically, reaching a level where they could subjugate dragons. Of course, it still involved considerable casualties, but there was a big difference between an unbeatable enemy and a difficult but defeatable boss monster. Those Apelles bastards. There was a saying in this world's historical and biological academic circles: if something bizarre happens, there's a 50% chance Apelles is behind it. It reminded me of a certain country from my previous life. Yet in this world, Apelles managed to surpass even that country in audacity. When humanity realized they could hunt dragons, Apelles began the task without much concern for military casualties. As a result, the dragon population plummeted dramatically during the Apelles' period. People even seriously wondered if they might go extinct. A lot happened after that, but the end result was that the dragons, fed up with Apelles' bullshit, joined hands with Kephilofen to destroy Apelles. Legend had it that Emperor Amonka the Great commanded his troops while riding the Dragon Lord of the time. Anyway, the dragons tormented by Apelles reached a grand compromise with Kephilofen. One of the terms of this pact was the periodic offering of dragon blood. Rather than dying and giving up all their resources at once, the dragons would live long lives and provide blood regularly in exchange for being left in peace. It was a peculiar compromise, but one that worked. They say that the dragons used to live in the imperial palace during the founding days, but nowadays they all live in mountains or caves, which is troublesome. She added something about how, if dragons were still in the palace, Penelia's mission would have been much quicker, but I barely caught it. I wonder what a dragon living in the imperial palace would be like. Chapter 308. Fools who are happy just by seeing each other's faces. 4. After extracting blood from 3 dragons, the team arrived at the final cave, which was home to a golden dragon. I had a feeling this one would be harder than the others as soon as I pricked it to draw its blood. Sadly, my instincts were correct. It was incredibly difficult. The scales were so much harder than the previous 3 that I had to use all my strength to pierce them. My hands were still shaking from the effort. Is it over? While I was pouring the blood from my blade into a vial, a deep voice rang from above. Despite the dragon's attempt to speak softly, its sheer size made its voice boom throughout the cave. Yes, it's all done. Thank you for your cooperation. It's nothing. It is only natural for a child to honor the agreements of their parent. The dragon made a gesture that seemed like shaking its head. From a human perspective, it was hard to tell exactly what movement it was making when you were looking up at such a massive creature, but I could tell the response was friendly. Since the Empire's founding, detailed records of dragons have been meticulously maintained. These included their locations, ages, temperaments, favorite foods, and even reasons for relocating if they moved to a new lair. Thanks to these records, the Empire had managed to coexist peacefully with dragons for centuries. This dragon, born about 300 years ago, was particularly friendly towards humans, or more specifically, the Livnomen imperial family, compared to other dragons. By the way, how is that child, Corvus, doing these days? The dragon casually asked the question while watching my team transfer the blood, as if remembering something. I froze. Referring to the emperor by his first name and calling him a child was enough to be deemed treasonous, but this dragon had that right. His Majesty has begun delegating tasks to the Crown Prince. It seems he'll abdicate soon. Ah, has it come to that already? Humans grow old so quickly, what a pity. I couldn't respond to the dragon's lament. Quickly was a relative term, considering the emperor had ruled for decades. But for this dragon, who was born during Emperor Amonkha the Great's time and had lived through the reigns of all Kephalophan's emperors, it was just a blink of an eye. In fact, emperors traditionally visited this dragon with a few trusted aides after their coronation. It might seem excessive for the emperor to come in person rather than sending a representative, but it couldn't be helped. Still, I envy him. That child will soon see his father again. The dragon's wistful tone carried a weight of longing. After all, it was the only offspring of Amonkha the Great's mount, the dragon lord who had fought alongside the emperor on the battlefield. That lineage made it a special existence to both the empire and the dragons. Oh dear, I seem to have burdened you with sentimental ramblings. The dragon, lost in thought for a moment, broke the silence with a flick of its tail. A pile of objects slid across the ground and stopped in front of me. Labor deserves compensation. These are my scales and claws. Take them all. Sorry, I couldn't help but stammer. Intact dragon scales and claws were as valuable as their blood. But unlike blood, which could be drawn periodically once you pierced the scales, getting intact scales and claws required waiting for the dragon to molt. Unfortunately, their molting was random. Moreover, dragons generally disliked leaving remnants of their bodies behind, so they usually burned them immediately after molting. I molted 2 years ago. Knowing you'd be coming soon, I kept these instead of disposing of them. But this dragon endured the discomfort and saved them. Thank you. We'll use them wisely for the imperial family and the empire. It's fine. This is a gift for the hard-working child in front of me, so use them as you wish. I stared blankly at the dragon. As I wished. So, you brought all this to me? Yes. I couldn't help but chuckle after seeing the fourth manager's eyes sparkle as if she was seeking praise. I half wondered if she had changed careers to be a dragon slayer when she first walked in draped with dragon scales and claws, but it turned out that she had just received them as gifts. The minister of the Special Service Agency also said that byproducts obtained during missions belong to the field captain. The fourth manager hurriedly added when an awkward silence fell. She must have thought I was hesitating about whether I could accept these items. That wasn't really why I was quiet, but I didn't bother correcting her. Thank you. Who would have thought I'd get to handle things like this in my lifetime? I patted the fourth manager's head in gratitude. It was a bit surprising, but I did receive valuable items for free. Dragons willingly gave their blood, but they weren't inclined to give anything else. Honestly, it was understandable if you put yourself in their position. Humans might donate blood, but if someone asked for their skin or fingernails, that'd earn them a string of curses. Dragons would probably give a look of contempt and say something like, "Are you looking at me the same way Apels did?" If you even mentioned their scales. Master, if it's not too much to ask, then a hug. The fourth manager timidly spoke up as I continued patting her head. For someone who shares the same rapid heartbeat tendencies as the Mage Duchess, it was unexpected for her to make the first move. But it was admirable that she gathered the courage. It was so noble to see her moving forward despite knowing her weakness. All right, if Penelia wants it, then of course I'll do it. So, I hugged her right away. To be honest, I would have hugged her even if she hadn't asked. Hup. She let out a small gasp as her arms wrapped around my back. I could feel her trembling slightly, but I chose to ignore it. I could also sense her determination to endure as much as possible. I was worried since she was one of the weakest when it came to physical contact along with the Mage Duchess, but I really felt glad to see that she was improving without me noticing. You worked hard piercing those scales. Do you have time to join me for dinner later? Why yes, of course. Seeing her nod hurriedly, it didn't seem to be a lie. Not that the fourth manager had ever lied to me before. Master, if it's all right, could Elizabeth also? I already met Elizabeth for lunch. Don't worry about it. Her concern for the first manager even in this situation made me smile. They really are friends, huh? The first manager also told me when the fourth manager would arrive. Watching them care for each other like this was heartwarming, especially after witnessing the intense sparring between Sarah and Countess Horfeld recently. The meal itself ended uneventfully. The fourth manager was naturally quiet, and with her mouth full of food, she became even quieter. Still, she responded eagerly whenever I initiated a conversation and made sure the discussion didn't fall flat. She probably realized that it'd be a while before we'd see each other again after today, so she made an effort to engage. Thanks to that, the meal itself ended peacefully and warmly, but there was a bit of a commotion at the end. I can't accept this. How could I dare to take something so precious? Come on, you're the one who brought this in the first place. After thinking about it, it didn't feel right for me to keep all the scales and claws the fourth manager received as compensation for her work, so I tried to return half to her. Naturally, the fourth manager firmly refused, but dragon scales enhance magical resistance just by carrying them. Share them with your unit. She finally accepted when I mentioned the masked unit. For the fourth manager, the masked unit was like family. Besides, for the masked unit that ran around like dogs both domestically and abroad, a charm that improved magical resistance would be worth their weight in gold to them. They'd all be happy to get it for free. Of course, I insisted that she make weapons with the claws. With dragon claws as material, top-tier craftsmen would beg to work on them, even offering money to do so. Whatever they make would undoubtedly be better than the sword I gifted her. I'll definitely repay your kindness, master. Your presence is repayment enough, so don't feel burdened. Why yes, I'll keep that in mind. After sending off the fourth manager, who bowed several times even though she brought the items herself, I looked at the still plentiful remains. What should I do with the rest? It was a dilemma. I might have kept it all if there were less, but there was enough to share with others, so I couldn't do that. Keeping all this treasure for myself felt like tempting fate to punish me later. Should I give it to the crown prince? After pondering for a while, a reasonable idea came to mind. Why not just dump it on the crown prince? Giving him about half should be fine. Right, let's call it an early pregnancy congratulations gift. Although I didn't obtain it myself, weren't lovers of one body and soul. It should be okay to take credit on the fourth manager's behalf. Or so I thought. Executive manager. Yes, your highness. What kind of accessories do you think we could make with these scales? I hadn't accounted for the crown prince being utterly unhinged. The crown prince, who was puzzled when I came to his palace voluntarily, widened his eyes as soon as he saw the scales and claws. Even for a royal, dragon byproducts other than blood weren't easy to come by. Not long after, his initial shock gave way to an unsettling gleam of madness. Judging by his immediate interest in making accessories, this was clearly not an ordinary kind of madness. This crazy bastard. I barely swallowed the words rising to the tip of my tongue. Sure, that dragon might not be a direct ancestor of his, but it was still the child of the Empire's founding figure. In a way, it could be seen as a minor founder itself. At the same time, I felt like laughing. How badly must he have been scolded by the crown princess to think of making accessories from dragon scales? She must have torn into him as soon as I left the palace. Suddenly, I felt at peace. How about sending armor made from the claws to the invincible Duke instead? However, it was a subordinate's duty to stop a superior who had fallen into madness. Before he committed the atrocity of crafting jewelry from the scales, I suggested a better alternative. Knowing the crown princess, receiving jewelry wouldn't improve her mood. On the contrary, she'd likely be furious about how such precious materials were used. In that case, it'd be more efficient to target the invincible Duke, the crown princess's father, rather than the crown princess herself. That's a good idea, as expected of the executive manager. Thankfully, the suggestion was convincing enough for him to nod in agreement. You idiot, make sure you apologize to that dragon when you ascend the throne. Chapter 309, Experienced Workers Are Better 1. After I visited the capital, the pastry club room transformed into a multi-purpose space. It had already been a pseudo-multi-purpose space thanks to its eccentric members, but at least back then, the chessboards and poker cards stayed hidden in a drawer. Now, massive tools unrelated to baking had taken up permanent residence, boldly claiming their spots in the room. If we grind the scales into existing elixirs, no, wait. Soaking them directly in the potion to age might work even better. That's not a bad idea. With such high-quality materials, the effects would be incredible. The Mage Duchess spoke as if she was seeking my agreement. Of course, I was just a swordsman, so I had no idea whether it was good or bad. I just nodded along because she seemed genuinely happy. Fufu, look forward to it. Something beyond your imagination will be created. At my response, the Mage Duchess smiled deeply and dropped the scales into the potion. Dragon scale infused liquor. The thought came to me instinctively. It felt disrespectful to the dragon who generously gave us these precious items, but I couldn't help it. The setup looked exactly like someone making artisanal liquor. 78-year aged golden dragon scale, just the name sounded grand. Grand, my ass. Shaking off the ridiculous idea, I turned my attention to the table where the precious scales and claws were. The Mage Duchess, whose ears were already perked up after being shown around the mansion, couldn't hide her joy upon seeing the dragon byproducts. For a mage, dragon byproducts were top-tier materials. Especially since, unlike blood, these couldn't be obtained periodically, making them even more precious. Having suddenly acquired such valuable items, the Mage Duchess's ears flapped with excitement at the fantastic combination of a gift from me plus experimental materials to fuel a mage's passion, and she set up all sorts of experimental equipment in the pastry club room. Fortunately, the other members didn't particularly mind. Lather, for instance, was thrilled to be able to watch the Mage Duchess's experiments in real time. Even Louise, the club leader and a mage herself, showed interest. And to think someone wanted to turn this into jewelry. I couldn't get over it. Materials the Mage Duchess handled with reverence and that mages coveted as treasures were almost reduced to mere jewelry. If that had actually happened, the person responsible might have gone down in history as a lunatic. It was fortunate that he came to his senses before handing it over to a craftsman. Between accessories made from dragon scales and a sword made from dragon claws, the latter was undoubtedly the more impressive choice. On one side, magical experiments were underway, on the other was baking. At first, I couldn't help but wonder if this was sanitary. History exams these days seem entirely focused on the North. Let's think positively. Where else but the Academy would we learn about the North's history? Thankfully, the Academy entered the exam period, meaning we avoided overlapping experiments and baking sessions. If it weren't exam time, experiments would only have happened while the members were in class. Theoretical exams are just a hassle. For knights, shouldn't practical exams be enough? You're right, knights speak with their swords. Rudy's nodded vigorously, seemingly agreeing with Eric's grumbling. Meanwhile, the notebook in front of him hadn't moved past the first page. He looked so uninterested that VR would have been disappointed to see this. Empty-headed bastard. It was pitiful. Even if physical strength was important for a knight, they needed some basic brains. A swordsman with nothing in his head wasn't a knight but a thug. Sarah seemed to share my thoughts as she glanced at Eric again and again. She probably couldn't bring herself to say anything to a foreign prince, but it looked like she couldn't bear to see her beloved childhood friend turn into a stupid knight. By the way, Eric, have you decided on your duel partner? I saw Sarah flinch when Rudy's suddenly talked to Eric. She didn't have to worry. Just talking to Rudy's wouldn't lower one's IQ. Besides, while Rudis's actions were strange, his intelligence itself was surprisingly decent. The problem was that he invested that intelligence into his eccentricities. Anyway, Eric shook his head lightly at Rudis's question. Not yet. I don't have anyone specific in mind, so I'll go with whoever I'm assigned. He was saying that he'd leave the selection of his duel partner to the system rather than choosing manually. Students wouldn't know each other's abilities well during the first year, so they followed the Academy's matchmaking system. But by the second year, most were already aware of the relative strengths and the weaknesses of their peers. Everyone knew who was stronger, who was weaker, and who matched their level. Since the Academy considered this sort of judgment a skill in itself, duel partners were allowed if both parties agreed. So, there was usually an intense game of reading each other to find suitable duel partners for the second years, but Eric seemed confident enough in his skills to leave it to chance. The confidence of Acrossius, it was heartwarming to see. What about you? Oh, I picked mine right away. Eric's counter question received an unexpected answer. If anything, Rudy's should be more confident, not less. Did he actually go through the trouble of choosing his own opponent? Charles Ulreed, he's a truly exceptional knight. I wanted to face him again this year, so I signed up immediately. Ah, hearing that name, not just me but a few others in the room who knew the backstory fell silent. This sadistic bastard, of all the people he could have chosen, why him? For a student in the swordsmanship department, the practical exam was more important than the theory exam. That was why the effort to find a suitable dual partner for a smooth and comfortable exam was crucial. Of course, students must avoid openly choosing an opponent significantly weaker than themselves. Aside from whether the other party would accept, such an obvious ploy wouldn't escape the instructors' eyes. Upsetting the instructors who were grading you could make things harder instead of easier. So, I was carefully selecting an opponent when, "Teacher, I'm sorry, but could you repeat that?" I never expected my caution to backfire like this. I was surprised when I was suddenly called out by the head instructor of the swordsmanship department while preparing for the theory exam, but I was beyond shocked when I heard the reason. As a result, I even committed the rudeness of questioning the head instructor, who was also a noble. "Student Rudies has chosen you as his dual partner for the practical exam." Despite my rudeness, the head instructor kindly repeated himself as if he understood my disbelief. Honestly, at this point, I'd rather prefer for him to get angry and say that it was a joke. "Please, but teacher, I'm not good enough. I can't be a match for Rudies," I argued, barely holding on to my fading consciousness. Yes, I was lacking. How could a mere student be a match for a prince from a kingdom of knights? This was clearly a case of a master choosing a novice. It shouldn't be allowed. You're being overly modest. If you're unqualified, then there are hardly any students here fit to call themselves human. However, my reasonable objection seemed to please the head instructor, who started explaining why I was suitable as a dual partner. Forget logic, I just wanted him to say this wasn't going to happen. I wanted him to dismiss the idea outright. There was no way I'd be fighting a prince 2 years in a row. Is he doing this on purpose? At that moment, a logical suspicion popped into my mind. Since the prince had to spar anyway, maybe they were trying to dump it on someone experienced rather than assigning it to someone else. No, this couldn't happen. Didn't I struggle like a dog last year? I was a nervous wreck during the whole match, terrified of injuring royalty or making it obvious I was trying to lose quickly. I was lucky to lose without being discovered, but there was no guarantee that luck would continue this year. Damn, I should have just chosen Eric if I'd known this would happen. At least that way, I could have earned points for boldly challenging someone stronger than me and losing honorably. Let me think about it a little more. Of course, selecting a dual partner should be done with care. I hope you reach a good decision. Yes, thank you. By good decision, the head instructor clearly meant me accepting this setup. But was it really a good decision if it meant throwing someone to the wolves? Not long after, I was summoned again by the head instructor. I still hadn't come up with a solid excuse to refuse, which put me in an awkward spot. "You'll get good scores if you show a good performance against a difficult opponent." He even dangled the bait of a good score, but I wasn't particularly interested. Of course, if the head instructor himself mentioned that, then it must be quite high. It would probably be a score difficult to gain through normal efforts. I'm not confident I can show an excellent performance. Still, I didn't want to do it. I'd rather get a lower score and not do it. You're underestimating yourself too much. As someone who's watched you for the past year, I can assure you, you're more than capable. More than enough to make me proud to call you my disciple. I flinched momentarily at those words. Being introduced as his disciple would mean I could receive a letter of recommendation from the head instructor, who was renowned for his swordsmanship. No matter what, this wasn't right. Besides, while the head instructor's recommendation would be nice, it wasn't that important. I couldn't risk getting hurt by being too greedy. I'm honored by your words, but I'd worry about tarnishing your reputation instead. And there are others who share my opinion. The head instructor handed me something before I could finish. His determined expression made it clear he wouldn't take no for an answer, so I gave up and took the papers at his face that told me to read it first before talking. I didn't have high expectations. It was probably recommendation letters from other instructors in the swordsmanship department. If other instructors' recommendations were added to the head instructors, then it would mean that the entire department was endorsing me as a talent. But I still didn't want to do this even if the whole academy was endorsing me. Wait, what? Am I dreaming? My eyes widened as soon as I saw the papers the head instructor handed me. It was indeed recommendation letters, but not from instructors. There were just 2. However, the names on them were extraordinary. The prosecutor's office's executive manager. The first letter had the name of the executive manager. His reputation preceded him, a legend whispered among students. They said that any promising student he took note of would be recruited immediately upon graduation. No tests, no hoops, and just a direct line into prestigious roles in the administration or military. Last year's student council officers had supposedly entered those very ranks under his guidance. It would be a lie to say I wasn't excited. The head instructor's recommendation might open doors in the fencing world, but the executive manager's was an endorsement from a powerful figure in the current government, a whole different league. The difference in caliber was inevitable. And the other one was Rudy's. This one caught me off guard in a different way. A recommendation from a foreign prince. I hadn't expected that. Officially, a prince's recommendation wouldn't carry weight within the empire. But unofficially, a noble recognized by a foreign royal. That kind of acknowledgement carried implicit honor. People would marvel at what kind of person could earn even a prince's acknowledgement. Moreover, it can be flaunted within the social circles as a deep connection with royalty. Even if I didn't pursue a career in government or the military, this letter would prove useful in countless ways. This bastard. At the same time, an indescribable emotion welled up. If he wrote a recommendation letter just for a dual partner request, then didn't that mean that he knew just how desperately I wanted to avoid this match? So he chose me while knowing this. Did he think I'd forget everything and be happy just because I received a recommendation letter? I can't betray this trust. I'll do my best. That's right. My past self, the one who tried to dodge this, was gone. What was left now was a knight who bravely accepted challenges head-on. Rolling around for free and rolling around for compensation were different, after all. I will face this challenge with the resolve to stake my very soul for His Highness Rudius. Chapter 310. Experienced workers are better too. The road to hell was often beautifully paved. That was why those unaware of the destination happily headed towards hell, and even those who knew took heavy steps, finding comfort in the pretty path. I heard Charles accepted the challenge. As expected, he wants to face me again too. No, never mind. Eric seemed like he was about to say something to Rudy's, who was laughing joyfully, but he closed his mouth again. He probably didn't feel confident in winning against the prince's crazy values with logic. Instead, Eric looked at his textbook with a somewhat bitter gaze, perhaps feeling sympathy for Charles, who must have accepted the nomination while looking like he was drinking poison. At that moment, I felt glad that my brother was a good person who could sympathize with others. I'm sorry. I also expressed my condolences and apologies to Charles, who wasn't here. If even Eric, who was just an observer, felt this way, then imagine my guilt as a participant in this scheme. My recommendation letter probably played an important role in getting Charles to accept the nomination. In other words, I was one of those who paved his road to hell. I do feel bad, but what could I do? I was shocked when I first heard that Rudy's had chosen Charles, but thinking about it carefully, there was no better choice. It's hard to find someone like him. If it were just about finding a strong student, that would be easy. Eric, for instance, was stronger than Charles, and even excluding Eric, there were probably 5 or 6 others. However, accurately assessing both the opponents and one's own capabilities and engaging in a courteous sparring match without causing any harm went beyond mere strength. That went beyond mere skill. It was an art form. You'd probably need to be a veteran training instructor to even attempt it. That was why I wrote a recommendation letter for Charles, who was still only in his 2nd year. If one had to suffer because of their abilities, then shouldn't they at least be guaranteed success with those abilities? That was all I could do for him. It would have been nice if Charles was an Armine noble. I gently closed my eyes as I heard Rudy's murmur regretfully. What a cruel bastard. If Charles was an Armine noble, then Rudy's would probably seek him out even after graduating from the academy. It was really fortunate that Charles was from the Empire. When I heard that Rudy's had chosen his dual partner, I wasn't particularly interested. I felt sorry for Charles, who had become the prince's dedicated opponent, but that was it. Unlike Rudy's, I had no intention of choosing a dual partner. I might have reconsidered if I had known I would be in the same position as Charles. Teacher. Ah, Louise. I was called to the faculty office by the head instructor of the magic department. Actually, I had been called frequently since the start of the school year because the head instructor respected my master, but this was the first time I'd been called to the faculty office instead of the head instructor's private office. I understood why as soon as I saw the pile of papers stacked on the head instructor's desk. I'm sorry to bother you when you're busy, but these are the students who have requested you as their dual partner for the upcoming practical exam. The head instructor's calm explanation made me freeze on the spot. That entire stack, all of them chose me. There are too many. A chill ran down my spine. With only slight exaggeration, the stack looked almost equal to the total number of second-year magic department students. No, on second thought, there might not be any exaggeration at all. There are many applicants, but you don't need to worry. You'll only have one match anyway, so you just need to choose one from among them. Those words made me feel a little relieved. It was natural for duels to be one-on-one, but without that obvious constraint, I might have been stuck fighting every single second-year magic student non-stop. Still, the relief didn't erase my mixed emotions. Did everyone in the department see me as an enticing target? Or did I have a grudge against someone I wasn't aware of? Either way, it wasn't a good situation. I've lived a good life. I never expected to suddenly become the public's #1 enemy. Had I been living a meaningless life all this time? Don't overthink it. To these students, dueling with you is a once-in-a-lifetime honor. Seeing my expression darken, the head instructor spoke with a small smile. Mages are beings who would jump into a fire pit for even the tiniest revelation. How could they stay still with the only disciple of Her Grace the Mage Duchess right next to them? Really? Of course. A mentor always leaves their mark on their disciple. How helpful would it be to directly experience that disciple's magic? The head instructor even added that they would have chosen me too if they were still a student, and I could only nod in response. So that was what it was about. It wasn't out of grudge or competitiveness, but purely because they wanted to experience my magic firsthand. That's even more dangerous. A different kind of chill ran down my spine. A human grudge would have been easier to handle, but the relentless curiosity of a magician was a whole other level of danger. I had seen many mages during my time as a magic department student. They all seemed normal usually, but they became serious and aggressive as if their personalities had changed when it came to magic-related issues. I'd heard mages were supposed to maintain their composure at all times, but apparently, that rule had its exceptions. Who should I choose? So, I felt troubled. Among these frenzied students, who should I choose to avoid future problems? Of course, it wasn't that the others would hold a grudge if I didn't choose them. No, the problem was the opposite. It was harder to predict what people without grudges might do. After all, fear of the unknown was always the strongest. That dilemma was quickly resolved. I remembered what Rudy's said in the club room. His persistence in continuing last year's rivalry into this year suddenly clicked. Charles Ulreed, he's a truly exceptional knight. I wanted to face him again this year, so I signed up immediately. Alright, I should do the same. If I have to choose anyway, then it's better to go with someone I know, right? This year's practical exam followed the same format as last year. VR and other forces from the 3 countries spread out to prepare for any emergencies, while the principal and I personally checked all the arenas. Moreover, being experienced, they moved efficiently without needing instructions. Whenever I thought it would be good to have someone here, I'd run into forces from the 3 countries. It was one of those moments that made me appreciate the joy of working with capable people. Anyway, as I was making the rounds of the arenas with the principal, we arrived at the place where Rudy's and Charles were facing off. My, that's impressive. Yes, he's an excellent student. We witnessed the tearful struggle of one night. Rudy's and Charles were fiercely crossing swords. However, upon closer inspection, Rudy's attacks consistently reached Charles, while Charles's attacks were mainly directed along paths Rudy's could block. Despite this, it couldn't be said that Charles was being one-sidedly beaten as he didn't suffer any fatal blows. It just felt like the inevitable injuries that occurred during a close match. How can someone like that exist? I had already seen it last year, but witnessing it again didn't make it any less shocking. Sure, deliberately losing wasn't hard. You could simply let yourself be hit in a vulnerable spot, and it would be over. However, that would never fool your opponent. Yet Charles pulled it off. He showed a fierce battle that felt like a satisfying match, natural enough that the opponent wouldn't notice, all while avoiding serious injuries to both himself and his opponent. It was amazing how he managed to do that. It should be ending soon. Charles's movements became busier as his injuries started to accumulate. To others, it might look like he was making a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the sparring match. In reality, he was preparing for his final act. Charles had done all he could and was now setting the stage for his defeat. A last-ditch move, one that could lead to a stunning reversal if it succeeded, or mark the end of the duel if it failed. Oh, what a shame. Yes, it was a close call. If it had succeeded, it would have led to another close battle. The result was, of course, failure. It was such a close failure that even the principal sighed. He's top tier. And then I saw it. the genuine smile on Charles's face as he lay on the ground. To most, that smile would seem like the mark of a good sportsman, graciously accepting defeat. But I knew better. It was the expression of someone relieved that the curtain had finally fallen on their performance. Should I recommend him as an Imperial instructor? I seriously considered it. Finding strong knights was easy, but finding knights like Charles was rare. He'd be perfect as a martial arts instructor for royalty. This was fantastic. Let's do this again next time. For once, the echoing declaration of a certain redhead across the arena didn't bother me. 3 years of dueling royalty at the academy, Charles now held a title few could claim, even across the entire continent. If he could handle Rudy's, then teaching Imperial heirs wouldn't be too hard for him. I should discuss this with the invincible Duke next time. After all, he needed someone trustworthy to train his grandchildren. Coincidentally, Eric's duel began in another arena just as Rudis's duel ended. It was the same last year. Were their student numbers consecutive or something? It was convenient for me to watch, so I didn't particularly mind. That was incredible. Eric, I think you finished the fastest out of everyone. By the time I reached the arena, the duel was already over, probably setting a new record. As Sarah said as she stuck to Eric's side, it must be a record for the shortest time. I was lucky. Normally, it would have taken longer. Eric smiled slightly at Sarah, whose eyes were sparkling. But his expression seemed subtly stiff, as if something was bothering him. What's wrong? I tilted my head. Why did he look like that? It wasn't just an ordinary win, it was a record-breaking, flawless victory without a single scratch. There was no better way to win, so what's eating at him? Well, I shouldn't worry too much. Maybe it was unrelated to the duel. I tried to keep smiling for Sarah, who was beaming with pride, but in truth, I wasn't feeling great. Over winter break, I focused solely on training back at the territory. I achieved decent results and gained confidence that I could beat anyone in the academy except for maybe Rudy's. I wanted to finish it in 5 exchanges. It took me 7. Should I have sacrificed my shoulder? Actually, there was a way to end it within 5 moves. It would have been quickly over if I'd been willing to take an injury in order to close the distance. It seemed that my instincts still prioritized avoiding an injury even when it held me back. That was another habit I'd need to train out of.